Sometimes the quietest places are the ones still holding a story that hasn't finished being told. The rain had started just after dusk, a slow, steady fall that turned the dirt road into a ribbon of dark mud, glistening under the faint glow of a half-hidden moon, and Ethan Cole drove the last mile with both hands tight on the wheel, eyes fixed ahead as if the past itself might step out in front of him if he looked away for even a second. It had been years since he'd come back out here, years since the old shed had anything to do with his life, but something about tonight felt unfinished. Like a memory that refused to stay buried, and beside him, Rex sat upright in the passenger seat, ears forward, body still, listening in a way no human ever could, his amber eyes catching the faint reflections of rain sliding across the windshield. When the truck finally rolled to a stop, the engine ticked softly as it cooled, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The kind of silence settling in that wasn't empty but waiting, heavy with something unspoken. Ethan stepped out first, boots sinking half an inch into the soaked ground, the cold air carrying the scent of wet wood and rust, and somewhere in the distance, a loose piece of metal tapped faintly against something unseen, a hollow, irregular rhythm that seemed almost deliberate. The shed stood where it always had, leaning slightly to one side, its weathered boards darkened by years of storms. The roof sagging like it had grown tired of holding itself together, and even now, it looked less like a structure and more like something left behind on purpose. Rex jumped down beside him, landing quietly despite his size, but instead of moving forward, the dog froze, his posture tightening, ears rising higher as his nose lifted into the damp air. And then came the low sound from his chest, not a growl exactly, but something deeper, instinctive, like recognition. Ethan noticed it immediately, his own senses sharpening the way they had learned to do long before nights like this, and he followed the dog's gaze toward the shed, toward the dark gap where the door hung slightly open. "You hear that, boy?" he murmured, though the rain had softened to a whisper and the world around them seemed to be holding its breath. Rex didn't answer, not the way people did, but he took a step forward, slow and deliberate, then another, his tail low, his body angled as if he were tracking something just beyond sight. The wooden boards creaked under Ethan's weight as he followed, each step echoing faintly through the hollow structure, the smell of damp timber growing stronger as they crossed the threshold, and inside, the air felt different. Thicker somehow, as if it had been sealed away with whatever story still lived there. Faint light slipped through the cracks in the walls, cutting thin lines across the floor, and dust stirred in the air like something waking up after a long sleep. Rex moved ahead, his paws silent against the worn planks, then stopped abruptly near the far corner, his head tilting, ears flicking once, twice, before he let out three short, sharp barks that cut clean through the quiet. Ethan felt it then, not fear, not exactly, but that familiar shift, the one that told him something here mattered, something real, and as he stepped closer, his eyes adjusted just enough to catch the movement in the shadows, a small shape trembling, then another, and then he saw them. A mother dog curled protectively around her tiny puppies, their bodies pressed close together against the cold, their breathing soft and fragile, and for a moment everything else faded, the years, the memories, the reason he had come back at all, leaving only the quiet truth of the moment, that sometimes what you find isn't what you were looking for, but exactly what you were meant to see. The mother dog did not move at first, her body curled tight around the small, fragile shapes pressed against her ribs, but her eyes were open, watching, steady and cautious, reflecting the thin lines of light that slipped through the broken boards. And Ethan slowed his steps instinctively, lowering his posture just enough to make himself smaller, less like a threat and more like something the room could accept. Rex stayed a few feet ahead, his tail low but no longer tense, his ears softening as he eased down onto the creaking floorboards, placing himself between Ethan and the small family as if to say that everything here was safe now, or at least safer than before. The rain outside had softened into a distant whisper, tapping lightly against the roof in a rhythm that felt almost protective. And for a long moment, no one moved, the space filled only with the quiet sound of breathing, slow and uneven from the corner where the puppies nestled closer together, their tiny bodies trembling against the cold. Ethan exhaled slowly, the breath fogging faintly in the chilled air, and he reached into his jacket with careful hands, pulling out a worn cloth from his pack, something simple, something clean, and he crouched down just far enough to slide it gently across the floor toward the mother dog without forcing the distance closed. She watched the motion closely, her head lifting slightly, ears flicking once as if weighing a decision that mattered more than it should, and then, after a few seconds that stretched longer than they were, she shifted just enough to allow the cloth to settle near her paws, her gaze never leaving his. Rex let out a soft huff, almost a breath of reassurance, and rested his chin lightly on the wooden floor, his presence calm and steady, the kind that did not ask for trust but simply offered it. Ethan could feel it then, that quiet shift in the air, the same kind he had felt in moments when something unseen chose not to turn away, and he stayed where he was, not rushing, not pushing, just letting the stillness do what words never could. One of the puppies stirred, a faint, fragile movement, and a soft sound escaped it, barely more than a whisper, but enough to draw the mother's attention back for a heartbeat before her eyes returned to Ethan, softer now, less guarded. He gave a small nod, almost without thinking, as if acknowledging something unspoken between them, and slowly, he reached into his bag again, pulling out a small canteen, unscrewing the lid with careful hands so the sound would not startle them, then pouring a little water into the cap and setting it gently on the floor, closer this time, but still within her choice to accept or refuse. The shed seemed to settle around them, the faint creaks in the wood no longer sharp but rhythmic, like something easing into place, and somewhere beneath it all, Rex lifted his head again, his ears turning slightly toward the far wall, his gaze narrowing with renewed focus, not alarm, but attention, the kind that did not belong to the present moment alone. Ethan noticed it immediately, the subtle shift, the way the dog's body stilled once more, and he followed the line of his sight toward the darker corner of the shed, where the boards met the earth in uneven lines, where shadows gathered just a little deeper than the rest, and though nothing moved there, not yet, the feeling returned, quiet but certain, that this place was not finished revealing what it had been waiting to show. Rex did not bark this time, and somehow that made the moment feel heavier, as if whatever had drawn his attention did not belong to noise but to something quieter, something that preferred to remain hidden unless it was truly seen, and he rose slowly from the floor, each step deliberate, his nose lowering toward the worn planks as he moved along the edge of the wall, tracing a path only he could understand. Ethan stayed where he was for a second longer, glancing back at the mother dog and her puppies, making sure they were settled, her eyes now softer, her body no longer rigid with fear, and then he stood, careful not to disturb the fragile calm they had built, and followed Rex across the dim interior of the shed. The air grew slightly cooler near the far corner, carrying a faint scent of earth and something older, something that had not been touched in years, and when Ethan reached out, brushing his fingers lightly along the wood, he felt it immediately, a subtle difference beneath the surface, a hollow space where there should have been solid ground. Rex stopped and placed one paw firmly against a narrow seam between the boards, then looked back over his shoulder, his amber eyes steady, waiting, not questioning but certain, and Ethan crouched beside him, pressing his palm flat against the floor, feeling the faintest shift, not movement exactly, but the absence of weight, as if the wood there had been laid over something meant to stay concealed. For a moment, memory brushed against him, the kind that did not arrive with images but with sensation, the echo of training, of moments spent listening for what others missed, and he exhaled slowly, grounding himself in the present before sliding his fingers into the thin gap where two boards met. The wood resisted at first, swollen from years of rain and neglect, but with a steady, patient pressure it gave just enough, lifting slightly with a soft, reluctant creak that seemed too loud in the stillness. Rex stepped back, giving him space, but his gaze never left the opening, his body poised in quiet anticipation. Ethan worked carefully, easing the board upward inch by inch until it came free, revealing a dark recess beneath, no more than a few inches deep at first glance, but deeper than the rest of the floor should have allowed, and as he leaned closer, the faint outline of something rested there, wrapped in a layer of dust and time. He reached in slowly, his hand brushing against cool metal, and for a brief second, the sensation sent a ripple through him, not fear, but recognition, like touching something that had been waiting longer than he had known. When he lifted it into the dim light, the object revealed itself piece by piece, a small, weathered container, the kind once issued long ago, its surface worn but intact, edges softened by years hidden beneath the floor, and though no markings were immediately clear, the weight of it felt deliberate, as if it carried more than its size suggested. The shed seemed to grow quieter around him, the rain outside nearly gone now, leaving only the faint drip from the roof and the distant hush of wind moving through the trees, and behind him, the soft breathing of the puppies continued, steady and alive, grounding the moment in something real and present. Rex let out a low breath, stepping closer again, his nose hovering near the container, not touching it, but acknowledging it, the way he had acknowledged the life in the corner only moments before, and Ethan understood then, not fully, but enough, that this was not just a discovery, not just an object hidden away and forgotten, but a thread, one that connected this place, the animals he had found, and the reason he had come back in the first place, into something that had not yet revealed its full shape but was already beginning to pull him forward. The metal container felt colder than it should have, as if it had held on to years that the rest of the shed had already forgotten, and Ethan turned it slowly in his hands, brushing away a thin layer of dust with his thumb until faint markings began to emerge beneath the grime, not clear at first, just shallow impressions worn down by time, but enough to suggest purpose, enough to tell him this had not been left here by accident. Rex remained close, his presence steady, his eyes following every movement with quiet focus, and when Ethan shifted the container slightly, a soft sound came from inside, not loud, just a subtle weight settling, something contained but not loose, something meant to stay intact. The air around them seemed to grow still again, the kind of stillness that pressed gently against the ears, and Ethan drew a slow breath before easing open the latch, careful with the hinge as if noise itself might disturb whatever fragile balance held the moment together. The lid lifted with a faint resistance, then gave way, revealing the contents piece by piece as the dim light slipped inside, touching the edges of something wrapped in aged cloth, folded with care, its surface marked by time but preserved with intention. He reached in and lifted it gently, the fabric soft but worn, and as he unfolded it, the shape beneath became clearer, a set of items arranged with a kind of quiet order, not scattered, not forgotten, but placed, as if someone had meant for them to be found exactly like this. There was a small metal tag, dulled but still intact, its surface scratched but legible enough to reveal a name, one that Ethan recognized not immediately with certainty but with the slow, dawning weight of memory, like a voice heard once long ago returning in a whisper. Beside it lay a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, creased carefully, protected by the cloth as if it had mattered more than anything else in the container, and for a moment Ethan did not touch it, his hand hovering just above, the air between his fingers and the paper charged with something he could not fully explain. Behind him, the faint sound of movement came from the corner, one of the puppies shifting closer to its mother, a soft reminder that life was still unfolding in the present even as the past reached quietly forward. Rex shifted his weight, then sat beside Ethan, not interfering, not urging, simply there, the way he had always been, grounding the moment in something steady and real. Ethan finally picked up the folded paper, his fingers careful along its edges, and as he opened it slowly, the faint scent of old ink and time rose into the air, subtle but unmistakable, and though the writing inside was not yet fully visible in the dim light, the presence of it alone carried meaning, the kind that did not need to be read to be felt. Outside, the rain had stopped completely, leaving the world wrapped in a soft, lingering silence, and the shed no longer felt abandoned in the way it had when he first stepped inside, but occupied, not by something seen, but by something remembered, something that had waited through years of quiet for this exact moment, for these exact hands, for the man who had returned without knowing why, and for the dog who had known long before him that this place was never empty at all. The paper trembled slightly in Ethan's hands, not from the air, but from something quieter, something deeper, the kind of weight that did not come from the object itself but from what it carried, and he adjusted his grip carefully, angling it toward the faint light that slipped through the cracks in the wall, letting the words begin to surface line by line as his eyes traced them slowly. The handwriting was steady, deliberate, shaped by someone who had taken their time, someone who had not written in panic or haste, but in quiet certainty, and though the ink had faded with the years, the message remained intact, preserved with the same intention that had kept it hidden beneath the floor for so long. Ethan did not read it aloud, but the meaning settled into him just the same, each word unfolding with a calm clarity that felt less like discovery and more like recognition, as if part of him had always known this moment would come, even if he had never understood how. Beside him, Rex lowered himself fully to the floor again, his body relaxed but alert, his head resting near Ethan's knee, the steady rhythm of his breathing anchoring the silence that followed, and from the corner, the soft sounds of the puppies continued, small movements of life that reminded him the present had not paused while the past revealed itself. The name on the metal tag returned to his mind, clearer now, no longer distant, and with it came fragments, not full memories, but impressions, the kind that surfaced without warning, tied not to details but to feeling, to moments shared in places where time had moved differently, where choices had been made without knowing how far their echoes would travel. Ethan glanced back toward the small family in the shadows, the mother dog watching him with a calm that had not been there before, her eyes no longer guarded but aware, as if she understood something about this place that he was only beginning to see. The shed itself felt changed, not physically, but in presence, the creaks in the wood softer now, the air less heavy, as though something that had been waiting had finally been acknowledged. He folded the paper carefully, matching the original creases with deliberate precision, then placed it back into the cloth along with the tag, not out of a desire to hide it again, but out of respect for the way it had been kept, the way it had endured. Rex lifted his head slightly, watching the movement, then turned his gaze once more toward the far wall, though this time there was no tension in his posture, only quiet awareness, as if the urgency had passed but the purpose remained. Ethan closed the container gently, the soft click of the latch settling into the stillness like a final note in a long, quiet sequence, and for a moment, he stayed there, kneeling on the worn boards. The weight of the past and the presence of the present meeting in a space that no longer felt abandoned. Outside, the clouds had begun to part, and a faint line of moonlight stretched across the ground. Just beyond the doorway, pale and steady, illuminating the path that led back toward the road, but Ethan did not move toward it, not yet, because something inside him understood that leaving would come later, that for now, this place, this moment, and the lives he had found within it were asking for something simpler, something quieter, something that did not need to be spoken, only lived. The silence inside the shed did not feel empty anymore, it felt settled, like something that had been waiting had finally been seen, and Ethan rose slowly from the floor, the small container now resting securely in his hands before he slipped it carefully into his pack, not hidden, but carried forward, the way certain things were meant to be. Rex stood as well, stretching lightly before stepping toward the corner again, but this time his movement was softer, his tail lifting slightly as he approached the mother dog and her puppies, his presence no longer cautious but quietly protective, as if he had accepted them as part of something that now belonged within his world. The mother dog watched him approach, her body still curved around her young, but her posture had changed, no longer tense, no longer braced for danger, and when Rex lowered his head just a little, offering that same silent reassurance he had given Ethan countless times before, she did not pull away, she simply watched, her breathing steady, her trust growing in small, invisible steps. Ethan moved closer as well, kneeling again a few feet away, his movements deliberate, unhurried, allowing the space to remain calm, and he reached into his bag once more, pulling out a small portion of food, placing it gently on the floor within her reach, not forcing the moment, only offering it. Outside, the clouds continued to thin, and a pale silver light began to filter through the broken edges of the roof, touching the floor in quiet patterns that shifted slowly with the passing breeze, and for the first time since he had arrived, Ethan noticed the temperature rising just slightly, the cold edge of the night easing into something more forgiving. One of the puppies stirred again, lifting its small head for a second before settling back into the warmth of its mother, and the sight of it brought a quiet change to Ethan's expression, something subtle, something that had not been there when he first stepped inside, the kind of softness that came not from relief, but from purpose. Rex turned his head toward him briefly, their eyes meeting in that familiar exchange that needed no words, and in that moment, Ethan understood what needed to happen next, not as a plan, not as a decision, but as something simpler. Something that felt as natural as breathing. He glanced around the shed once more, taking in the worn beams, the uneven floor, the quiet shadows that no longer felt heavy but simply present, and then back to the small family in the corner. Their fragile lives now part of this place, part of this night, part of whatever had led him here. He reached for his jacket, removing it slowly and laying it near them, adding another layer of warmth against the lingering chill, a small act that carried more meaning than it appeared, and when he stood again, he did not move toward the door immediately. He stayed for a moment longer, listening to the quiet, feeling the shift inside himself settle into something steady. Because sometimes the past did not return to pull you backward. Sometimes it led you forward in a way you could not see until you stood still long enough to understand it. And as Rex moved to stand beside him once more, calm and certain, Ethan realized that what he had found here was not just something hidden beneath old wood and forgotten time, but something alive, something waiting to be carried beyond these walls, into whatever came next. The night had softened into something almost gentle, the kind of quiet that followed after a storm had said everything it needed to say, and Ethan finally stepped toward the doorway, his boots pressing lightly against the worn boards as he moved, but he did not leave, not completely. Instead he paused at the threshold, one hand resting against the rough frame, his eyes drawn back once more to the corner where the mother dog and her puppies lay. The silver light from the moon reached further now, slipping through the broken roof and touching the edge of his jacket where it lay beside them, and for a moment, the scene felt suspended between two worlds, the one he had come from and the one he had just stepped into without fully understanding it. Rex moved ahead of him, stepping outside first, his paws quiet against the damp earth, but he did not wander far. He turned back almost immediately, standing just beyond the doorway, watching Ethan with that same steady patience, as if he already knew this moment would take time. The air outside carried the scent of wet pine and cool soil, cleaner now, lighter, and somewhere in the distance, a faint breeze moved through the trees, no longer restless, but calm, like a long breath finally released. Ethan stepped out beside Rex, the gravel shifting softly under his weight, and he glanced toward the truck parked a short distance away, its metal surface reflecting the pale light, a reminder of the road, of movement, of everything that had existed before tonight. But something held him there, something quiet but firm, and he turned back again, his gaze settling on the open doorway of the shed, the darkness inside no longer empty, but filled with something living, something that had reached out without asking and changed the direction of his night without warning. Rex let out a soft breath, then lowered himself to the ground just outside the entrance, his body angled toward both Ethan and the interior, as if he had chosen his place between two worlds, guarding not just what was inside, but what might come next. Ethan walked a few steps away, then stopped, his hand resting briefly on the side of the truck, the cool metal grounding him in the present, and he closed his eyes for a second, letting the silence settle into him fully, letting the weight of everything he had found begin to take shape. When he opened them again, the decision was already there, not loud, not forced, but clear in the way that certain truths arrive without needing explanation. He reached into the truck and pulled out a worn blanket from the back seat, thick enough to hold warmth, and without hesitation, he turned and walked back toward the shed, the gravel crunching softly beneath his boots. Rex rose immediately, falling into step beside him, his tail lifting just slightly, a quiet acknowledgement of something understood between them. Inside, the air felt different again, not colder, not warmer, but steadier, and Ethan moved slowly, placing the blanket near the small family, adding to the space he had already created, building something simple but necessary, something that would carry them through the night. The mother dog watched him, her eyes calm, her body no longer tense, and when he stepped back, giving her room, she lowered her head slightly, not in fear, but in acceptance. Ethan remained there for a moment, looking at them, at Rex, at the worn walls that had held all of this in silence for so long, and he realized that leaving was no longer just about walking away, it was about choosing how to return, and as he stepped back toward the doorway once more, the path ahead no longer felt uncertain, it felt waiting. The first hint of morning arrived not as light, but as a subtle shift in the air, a quiet thinning of the darkness that had wrapped the world through the night, and Ethan felt it before he saw it, standing just inside the doorway with Rex beside him, both of them facing the slow return of a new day. The sky beyond the trees had softened into a deep gray blue, and the outline of the landscape began to take shape again, each detail returning gently, as if the world itself preferred not to rush. The transition, behind him, the shed held its quiet warmth, the layered blankets and jacket forming a small refuge in the corner where the mother dog rested with her puppies, their breathing now steady, their small bodies no longer trembling with the same fragile uncertainty as before. Ethan turned back toward them, his steps slow, almost deliberate, as if he understood that leaving this space, even for a moment, carried weight now. And when he knelt again a few feet away, the mother dog lifted her head slightly, her eyes meeting his without hesitation, the distance between fear and trust now reduced to something almost invisible. Rex moved forward as well, his posture relaxed, his tail giving a faint, low movement that carried no tension, only quiet assurance, and he settled near the entrance again, maintaining that silent watch he had chosen earlier, a guardian not by command, but by instinct. The light grew stronger by degrees, slipping through the broken edges of the roof and along the worn boards of the floor, touching the metal container inside Ethan's pack with a faint, pale glow, a reminder that what had been uncovered was not separate from what lay here now, but connected, part of a larger pattern that was still unfolding. Ethan reached into his pocket briefly, feeling the folded paper again, not opening it this time, but acknowledging its presence, the way one acknowledges something that does not need to be explained to be understood, and he let his hand fall back to his side, his attention returning fully to the present. One of the puppies shifted again, this time lifting its small head higher, its eyes barely open but searching, and the mother adjusted her position slightly, allowing it to press closer, her movements calm, measured, no longer guarded but guided by something steady. Ethan watched the moment quietly, something inside him settling into place with it, the realization that this was not a passing encounter, not something meant to be left behind. Once the road called him forward again, outside, a faint line of gold began to edge along the horizon, the first true sign of sunrise, and with it came a subtle warmth that reached even into the open doorway, brushing against the edges of the shed, touching the space they occupied with a promise that felt both simple and profound. Rex stood then, stretching lightly before stepping just outside again, his gaze scanning the clearing, not searching for danger, but acknowledging the world as it returned. And then he looked back, his eyes finding Ethan's with that same quiet certainty that had guided every step of the night. Ethan rose slowly, his joints stiff from the cold and the hours spent in stillness, but his movements carried a clarity that had not been there before, and as he stepped toward the doorway once more, he paused again, not out of hesitation, but out of understanding, because leaving now was not the end of what had begun here, it was only the next step in carrying it forward, and in that moment, he knew with a calm certainty that whatever had drawn him back to this place had not been chance at all, but something quieter, something that had waited patiently until he was ready to see it. The sunlight reached the doorway fully now, warm and steady, spilling across the worn wooden floor and stretching toward the corner where the small family rested, and Ethan stood there for a long moment, watching as the light touched them gently, illuminating the quiet life that had held on through the night, fragile but certain, and something about that simple image stayed with him in a way nothing else had for a long time. Rex stepped forward into the light, his coat catching the soft gold of morning, and for a second he paused, turning his head slightly as if listening once more, not for danger, but for something deeper, something only he seemed to understand, and then he looked back at Ethan, calm, ready, the way he always had been when it was time to move. Ethan exhaled slowly, the breath leaving him like something he had been carrying without realizing it, and he gave a small nod, not to the dog, not to the shed, but to the moment itself, acknowledging it in the quiet way that mattered most. He stepped outside, the gravel firm beneath his boots now, the dampness of the night already beginning to fade, and the world around him felt different, not changed in appearance, but in meaning, as if the same road, the same trees, the same air had taken on a new weight simply because he had seen what had been hidden within it. He walked to the truck, opening the door and reaching inside, his movements steady, purposeful, gathering what he needed without hesitation, a larger blanket, a small crate, supplies that had once been packed for travel but now carried a different purpose, and when he turned back toward the shed, there was no uncertainty in his step. Rex moved ahead again, leading the way not with urgency, but with quiet assurance, as if he had already accepted what was coming next, and inside, the mother dog lifted her head once more, watching as Ethan approached, her eyes steady, no fear left in them. Now, only awareness, and when he set the crate down nearby, leaving its door open, placing the blanket inside with slow, careful movements, he did not reach for her, he did not rush the moment, he simply made the space ready. The puppies stirred as the light grew stronger, their small movements more active now, their breaths fuller, and the mother shifted slightly, not pulling away, not resisting, but observing, allowing the distance between them to close in its own time. Ethan stepped back, giving her the choice, the same way everything else in this place had been given time to reveal itself without force, and Rex settled once more at the edge of the room, his presence steady, a quiet bridge between trust and instinct. Outside, the morning continued to rise, the sky opening into a clear blue that promised a day without storm, and inside the shed, something equally clear had taken shape, something that did not need words or explanations, something that simply was. Ethan rested his hand briefly against the worn wall beside him, feeling the rough texture beneath his palm, grounding himself one last time in the place that had held all of this in silence, and then he stepped back toward the doorway, pausing only long enough to look once more at the small lives he had found, at Rex, at the space that no longer felt forgotten, and in that quiet pause, the understanding settled fully into him, not as a thought, but as something deeper, something certain. Sometimes you do not return to a place because you have unfinished business there, sometimes you return because something there has been waiting to begin, and as Ethan stepped out into the full light of morning, with Rex beside him and the path ahead open and clear, he knew that whatever came next would not be something he searched for, but something he had already been led to find.